So, meine Lieben, heute ist der 19.04.2026. Ein Tag nach meiner Taufe. Ja, ich lese jeden Morgen und jeden Abend 20 Minuten Bibel. Heute ist Morgensession, 19.04. Ich bin da wie Esther 3. Haman's plot against the Jews. Sometime later, King Xerxes promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, over all the other nobles, making him the most powerful official in the empire. All the king's officials would bow down before Haman to show him respect whenever he passed by, for so the king had commanded. But Mordecai refused to bow down or show him respect. Then the palace official at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" They spoke to him day after day, but still he refused to comply with the order. So they spoke to Haman about this, to see if he would tolerate Mordecai's conduct, since Mordecai had told him that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. He had learned of Mordecai's nationality, so he decided it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Instead, he looked for a way to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire empire of Xerxes. So in the month of April, during the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, lots were cast in Haman's presence. The lots were called Purim, to determine the best day and month to take action. And the day selected was March 7, nearly a year later. Then Haman approached King Xerxes and said, "There is a certain race of people scattered throughout all the province of your empire, who keep themselves separate from everyone else. The laws are different from those of any other people, and they refuse to obey the law of the king. So it is not in the king's interest to let them live. If it please the king, issue a decree that they be destroyed, and I will give 10,000 large sacks of silver to the government advisory to be deposited in the royal treasury." And the king agreed, confirming his decision by removing his signet ring from his finger and giving it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. The king said, "The money and the people are both yours to do with you as you see fit." So on April 17th, the king's secretaries were summoned and the decree was written exactly as Haman dictated. It was sent to the king's highest officers, the governors of the respective provinces and the nobles of each province in their own scripts and languages. The decree was written in the same name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's signet ring. Dispatches were sent by swift messengers into all provinces of the empire, giving the order that all Jews, young and old, including women and children, must be killed, slaughtered, and annihilated on a single day. This was scheduled to happen on March 7th, on the next year. The property of the Jews would be given to those who killed them. A copy of this decree was issued as law in every province and proclaimed to all people, so they would be ready to do their duty on the appointed day. At the king's command, the decree went out by swift messengers and was also proclaimed in the fortress of Susa. Then the king of Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa fell into confusion. Mordecai requests Esther's help. When Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city, crying with a loud, bitter wail. He went as far as the gate of the palace, for no one was allowed to enter the palace gate while wearing clothes of mourning. And the news of the king's decree reached all the provinces. Then was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, wailed, and many people lay in burlap and ashes. When Queen Esther's maids, eunuchs, came and told her about Mordecai, she was deeply distressed. She sent clothing to him to replace the burlap, but he refused it. Then Esther sent for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to her as her attendant. She ordered him to go to Mordecai to find out what was troubling him and why he was mourning. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the square in front of the palace gate. Mordecai told him the whole story, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the decree issued by Susa that called for death of all Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hathach to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. When Esther told Hathach to go back and relay this message to Mordecai, all the king's officials and even the people in the province know that everyone who appears before the king in his inner circle without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. So Hathach gave Esther's message to Mordecai. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arrive from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. You know, if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this. Then Esther sent out this reply to Mordecai: Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast from me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go to see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Esther 5. Esther's request to the king. On the 3rd day of the fast, Esther put on her royal robes to enter the inner court of the palace, just across from the king's hall. The king was sitting in his royal throne, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing there in the inner court, he welcomed her and held out the gold scepter to her face. So Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. Then the king asked her, What do you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? I will give it to you even if it is half my kingdom. And Esther replied, If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for the king. The king turned to his attendants and said, Tell Haman to come quickly to a banquet, as Esther has requested. So the king and Haman went to Esther's banquet. And while they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, Now, tell me what you really want. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half my kingdom. Esther replied, This is my request and deepest wish. If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I ask, please come with Haman tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for you. Then I will explain what this is all about. Haman's plan to kill Mordecai. Haman was happy as a man was a happy man when he left the banquet. But when he saw Mordecai sitting at the palace gate, not standing up or trembling nervously before him, Haman became furious. However, he restrained himself and went on home. Then Haman gathered together his friends and Zeresh his wife, and boasted to them about his great wealth and his many children. He bragged about the honors the king had given him, and how he had promoted over all the other nobles and officials. Then Haman added, "And that's not all. Queen Esther invited me and the king himself to the banquet is prepared for us, and she has invited me to dine with her and the king again tomorrow." Then he added, "But this is all worth nothing as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting there at the palace gate." So Haman's wife Zeresh and all his friends suggested set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall, and in the morning asked the king to impale Mordecai on it. When this is done, you can go your merry way to the banquet of the king. This pleased Haman, and he ordered the pole set up. The king honors Mordecai. That night the king had trouble sleeping, so he ordered an attendant to bring the book of the history of his reigns so he could read to him. In the records he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the eunuchs who guarded the door to the king's private quarters. They had plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. "What reward or recognition did we ever give Mordecai for this?" the king asked. His attendant replied, "Nothing has been done for him." "Who is that in the outer room?" the king inquired. As it happened, Haman had just arrived in the outer room of the palace to ask the king to impale Mordecai on the pole he had prepared. So the attendants replied to the king, "Haman is out in the court. Bring him in," the king ordered. So Haman came in, and the king said, "What should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me?" Haman thought to himself, "Whom would the king wish to honor more than me?" So he replied, "If the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's own royal robes, as well as a horse that the man himself has ridden, one with the royal emblem on its head. Let the robe and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let him see that the man whom the king wishes to honor is dressed in the king's robes, and led through the city square on the king's horse. Have the officials shout as they go, 'This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor.'" "Excellent," the king said to Haman. "Quick, take the robe and my horse, and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew, who sits in the gate of the palace. Leave out nothing you have suggested." So Haman took the robes and put them on Mordecai, placed him on the king's own horse, and led him through the city gate, shouting, "This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor." After Mordecai returned to the palace gate, but Haman hurried home dejected and completely humiliated. When Haman told his wife, Zeresh, and all his friends, what had happened, his wise advisors and his wife said, "Since Mordecai, the man who has humiliated you, is of Jewish birth, you will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him." Whilst they were still sitting, the king's eunuchs arrived and quickly took Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared. Esther 7. The king executes Haman. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. On the second occasion, while they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, "Tell me what you want." Queen Esther, "What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it's half the kingdom." Queen Esther replied, "If I found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and all the lives of my people will be spared. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If we had merely been told as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king. Who would do such a thing? King Xerxes remanded. Who would be so promiscuous as to touch you? Esther replied, This wicked man Haman is our advisor and our enemy. Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. Then the king jumped to his feet in rage and went out of the palace garden. Haman, however, stayed behind to plead for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew that the king intended to kill him. In despair, he fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, just as the king was returning from the palace garden. The king exclaimed, Will he even assault the queen right here in my palace, before my very eyes? And as soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. Then Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said Haman was set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall in his own courtyard. He intended to use it to impale Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination. Then impale Haman on it, the king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the pole he set up for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. Esther 8. A decree to help the Jews. On the same day, King Xerxes gave the property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther, and then Mordecai was brought before the king. For Esther had told the king how they were related. The king told of his signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai and Esther. And Esther appointed Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's property. Then Esther went again before the king, falling down at his feet and begging him with tears to stop the evil plot devised by Haman the Agagite against the Jews. Again, the king held out a gold scepter to Esther, so she rose and stood before him. Esther said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor with him, and if he thinks it is right, and I am pleasing to him, let there be a decree that reverses the order of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, who ordered that Jews throughout all the king's provinces should be destroyed. For how can I endure to see my people and my family slaughtered and destroyed? And then King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, I have given Esther the property of Haman, and he has been impaled on a pole because he tried to destroy the Jews. Now go ahead and send message to the Jews in the king's name, telling them whatever you want and seal it with the king's signet ring. But remember that whatever has already been written in the king's name and sealed with his signet ring can never be revoked. So on June 25th, the king's secretaries went summoned, and the decree was written exactly as Mordecai dictated. It was sent to the Jews and to the highest officers, the governors and the nobles of all 127 provinces, stretching from India to Ethiopia. The decree was written in the scripts and languages of all the people of the empire, including that of the Jews. The decree was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's signature. Mordecai sent the dispatches by swift messengers, who rode fast horses especially bred for the king's service. The king's decree gave the Jews in every city authority to unite to defend their lives. They were allowed to kill, slaughter, and annihilate anyone of any nationality or province who might attack them or their children and wives, and to take the property of those enemies. The day chosen for this event throughout all of the provinces of King Xerxes was March 7 of the next year. A copy of this decree was issued as law in every province and proclaimed to all people, so that the Jews would be ready to take revenge on their enemies on the appointed day. So urged on one of the king's commands, the messengers rode out swiftly on fast horses, bred for the king's service. The same decree was also proclaimed in the fortress of Susa. Then Mordecai left the king's presence, wearing the royal robe of blue and white, the great crown of gold, and the outer cloak of fine linen and purple. The people of Susa celebrated the new decree. The Jews were filled with joy and gladness, and were honored everywhere, in every province and city. Whenever the king's decree arrived, the Jews rejoiced and had great celebration and declared a public festival and holiday. And many of the people of the land became Jews themselves, for they feared what the Jews might do to them. So,